Let me go ahead and introduce the panelists who will be with us today. We introduced them to the stage, but let me have you put a face with the name. On the far end here, we have Jeremy Keel. Jeremy is the Executive Director of the Policy Innovation Lab at the University of Utah that's about 2 weeks old, focusing on pay for success, social impact bonds. Next to Jeremy, we have Andrea Phillips, who's a Vice President at Goldman Sachs Bank. Andrea participated in and was the point person for Goldman Sachs on behalf of the preschool initiative that United Way did. And next to Andrea, we have Bill Krim, who's a Senior Vice President at the United Way of Salt Lake and was one of the architects of the preschool Pay for Success social impact bond. Next to Bill, we have Brenda Van Gorder, who is the Director of Preschool Services at the Granite School District. Brenda really had the data, the program, the preschool program, and then the data behind it that we saw was scalable because it was having an impact and huge success margins for the kids in her program. And the Voices for Utah Children, United Way looked at that program and said, this is scalable, and we can not only scale the program itself, but the funding for the scaling could come through this Pay for Success social impact bond. And then myself, Ben McAdams, Mayor of Salt Lake County, and Janice Dubno, who is the Director of Early Education at Voices for Utah Children.
Thank you, Mayor. Hi. I'll be moderating the panel today. Like that? Does that work? Okay, great. Thank you. Clearly, I'm not as adept at public speaking as Mayor McAdams is here. What we're going to do is got a couple of questions for the panelists, and we'll take a few minutes to go through that, but we really want to leave enough time for questions and discussion. And we're hoping to have this be somewhat interactive. And I'd like to, I'd like this to be, and let me know if you can't hear me, and just kind of raise your hand. Okay, can't. Okay, can you hear me better now? Oh, okay. This is odd. I'm going to start off with Bill Krim, who's Senior Vice President of Collective Impact and Public Policy at the United Way of Salt Lake. And I'd like him to briefly talk about the collective impact context in which all this happened.
Thank you. Happy to be here and glad to talk about why we did this and what the context was. Because we are not bankers or finance people. We're social problem solvers. And it's our view that we have decades of evidence that funding isolated programs, no matter how we do it, does not solve complex social problems. There's mountains of history and data to tell us that we know lots of good evidence-based programs. They've been studied. We know that scaling those programs helps a lot of kids, but issues like poverty and poor health and homelessness and other complex social problems are so complex that we should not expect that a single program, no matter how well we scale it, no matter how good its evidence is, we shouldn't expect that a single program solves problems completely by itself. So we were attempting to solve the problem of poverty. We are still to this day in specific communities where poverty is concentrated, and within that context of groups working together differently across sectors, private sector, public sector, and nonprofit sector, the partnership that you see represented here figured out a way to do the first Pay for Success transaction for preschool that had ever been done. And there was no playbook for it. It was just figuring out moment to moment, what's the next thing we need? How do we tackle that particular challenge through a partnership, but with the ultimate goal being impact at a social scale, not programmatic scale, impact for an entire community, an entire county, ultimately an entire state.
Great, thank you. One of the things that's really important when you're learning and thinking about Pay for Success is that it all starts with the intervention and the group of intervention. So in our case, it was high quality preschool and Bill is talking about is groups working together. And it's really the work, the people doing the work on the ground, and the work on the ground impacting communities that's extremely important. I always like to say, without the Granite Preschool, we would still be all twiddling our thumbs. So I'd like to hand it over to Brenda to talk about the impact of high quality preschool and why the Granite School District preschool program is getting such great outcomes.
Thank you. I had all these great shark jokes with us in the other room, but oh well, now there's Megalodon right there. Yeah. So what we know from all of the research that's been happening nationwide for years and years is playing out here in Utah as well. Children who start school behind stay behind. And there is nearly a 100% chance that they will never catch up. Even with the best of teachers, they don't catch up. The kids who show up to school least likely to be ready for school are children who live in poverty. And in our program, we have been working and collecting data since 2005. And our first reportable data came out in 2006. Those little 3- and 4-year-olds have grown up all the way into junior high. We have our first group of students are in 7th grade. Their results from preschool have sustained. That's different than what we saw in all of the other research studies that were going on. And I think that's one of the things that made the outcomes and the preschool data so attractive to the funders, is that it wasn't just a blip on the radar screen and a short-term fix. This is a long-term fix that once you in school, once you can get past that hurdle and it's sustained results, there's nothing that can stop these kids. And they are at the tops of their classes. These are the kids who have every intention of going to college. There is nothing that's going to stop them. They are the future of our state. They're the future workers. They are the next mayor of Salt Lake County, possibly. These are kids who are everything that their economically advantaged peers are and that we would expect of them. They are beating all of the odds of what we would typically suspect would happen for children who live in poverty. Janice had mentioned that children who have an opportunity gap versus an actual learning gap, that's who we're talking about. These are children who are entering our preschool services way below their peers, and it's an opportunity gap and not an actual learning gap. And once we give them the intervention, they just soar and it doesn't stop. So it's pretty exciting to watch. And just while I've got the mic, just for a second, Mayor McAdams said that he wished that he could take all of you to see a preschool. He didn't say that I'm going to offer that. Anybody who wants to come and see it, please come. I'd love to show you around the preschool.
Great, thank you. And I do want to emphasize that these are primarily low-income children that Brenda is talking about, and they're performing in elementary and junior high school exactly where their advantaged peers are performing, and that's quite significant. So one of the things that's really important for a Pay for Success deal is you have to have certain things in place. And one of the reasons why we were able to do this transaction is we had data, we had model fidelity, and there were a couple of components that were in place that you need for a Pay for Success deal. And I'd like to ask Jeremy to say a few things about the lab and also talk about, what is the criteria for a Pay for Success deal? Because it's not everything is suited for it.
Thanks very much. It's nice to be here. Sorry, I came dressed as a college student today. I tried to go home and put a suit on, but I got stuck in traffic, so I came straight away. So I think, one of the things that really excites me about this model is that we live in an era of big data. We have for the first time really in human history, if you think about it, we have a very sophisticated understanding of some of these social problems that we're talking about. So homelessness, recidivism, some of these really challenging problems we have for the first time ever, very sophisticated understanding of. This is an opportunity really to exploit that understanding and bring that data and evidence to bear to actually have a real shot at having an impact on some of these problems. So I think it's a really exciting field. I just want to say that right off the bat. There's a number of things that you need to put these projects together successfully. And I won't go into all of those, but I'll just sort of emphasize a couple of them. One is I think you really need a committed policymaker, a committed elected official somewhere in local, state government that really has caught the vision for what this model means. I think Ben McAdams is really he sort of typifies this in my mind. I think he's the best example of this kind of policymaking around the country. And he's really sort of demonstrated that he's pieces of the system. So I think data, a dynamic data system is also another really sort of key piece of this. Maybe I'll just say one thing about the lab. Is this the right time to do that? So Kurt Bassett mentioned the lab in there. This is, it's called the Policy Innovation Lab. It's about 3 weeks old, literally. We got a very generous grant from the White House to start this up. And I think it really establishes, and I've been asked to come head the lab, but I think it really establishes the University of Utah and Utah generally as one of the really leading, the real hubs, intellectual hubs of this model and this effort. The only other institution that has something similar to this is Harvard at the Kennedy School of Government. So it's a real feather, I think, in Utah's cap to be able to have this here. What we'll be doing at the lab is effectively building capacity in this sector with both government and these service providers that have to get up this data and evidence curve that I was just describing a minute ago. So we'll be heavily involved in transactions, not just here in Salt Lake County and the state of Utah, but around the western half of the country. So it's a great opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy. Goldman Sachs was involved very early on in the process, and like Andy to talk about from the funder's perspective why she got involved, what are the risks and benefits to being involved in a pay-for-success transaction, and where she sees the market going, and why should funders, private, commercial, philanthropic funders participate?
Thank you, Janice, and so nice to be out here in Utah. Janice was threatening to make jokes about the shark and Wall Street, but we'll leave those. Anyway, so oftentimes people wonder when they think about investing in early education, they're sort of a little shocked that Goldman Sachs was at the table, and as Janice pointed out, really at the table from the early days. I think what's helpful to understand why Goldman Sachs would make this type of investment really has to do with the team where I sit at Goldman. I'm part of an investing team called the Urban Investment Group that has been in the business of making impact investments for about a dozen years. Now that predates the term impact investment by about 5 or 6 years. So when we got started, what we really all talked about was double bottom line investing, or investing the firm's capital in ways that both had a financial return, and we seek a risk-adjusted return with our investing, as well as an intentional and demonstrable social impact. The core of that investing business, and we've committed about $4 billion over the last dozen years, is really focused on real estate, so financing hard assets, community schools, health centers, affordable housing, mixed income housing, really a lot about disenfranchised communities, and how can you, through investment dollars, really transform those communities. So for us, when we were approached initially to do a social impact bond transaction, it really meant using those same capital market skills and applying it rather than to housing and bricks and mortar, but to preventive social services. And so for us, it was really a natural extension of the work that we were already doing. In terms of how we see the future, the space in terms of pay for success and social impact bond investments it's really early days. So far there have been 7 executed transactions in the US. As everybody's been saying, this is a really landmark deal here in Utah around early education. And we as a firm are optimistic that the space can grow and that we can create more scalable investment opportunities, but it really is early days. In terms of how we think about these investments, we really underwrite them like we would any other investment. And we think about the risks in a couple of different buckets. First, we think about impact risk. So we spend a lot of time with the data that everybody talked about, which is, okay, if we know this contract will pay when those kids stay out of remedial and special ed services, what is the track record of hitting those outcomes? Very quickly, you look at the data we have on this program, and it's incredibly compelling. The next area of risk we look at is implementation risk. Okay, so we know the program can have an impact if implemented well. Does this team of people have the capacity to implement this program well and to scale it and grow it? And again, like you'd look at any other investment, who's the management team? What are their systems in place for training their staff, for hiring their staff? And again, spend a little time with Brenda, get into those classrooms, meet the teachers, look at the professional development. And then again, the added piece of it is the collective impact framework that Bill talked about, because this program doesn't stand alone. There's a whole web of other supports that sit around it. Again, very compelling from an implementation perspective. The final area of risk that we think about is appropriation risk. And really the challenge there is these are long-term transactions, right? And so Mayor McAdams may or may not be still in Salt Lake County when we need someone to pay on that contract starting next year and the year after and the year after. And so we work very hard to make sure that there are protections in the contract against those changes in administration. And in our experience, that happens different ways. In the case of a deal we did in Massachusetts, the full faith and credit of the state was behind it. Here in Utah with the state, they were able to appropriate the money up front. And so we really very carefully look at all of those things so that we can get comfortable and convince our investment committee that this is really a solid financial investment as well as having a really compelling social impact.
Great, thank you. And I want to leave time for questions, so we're going to finish up our sort of opening remarks with Mayor McAdams, and then we'll open it up for questions.
I just want to say a couple of things. So what I think you're seeing here is a revolution in the way services are provided, and I tell government leaders and philanthropists and others to get ready because the world is changing. The days when you went to a dinner and you felt good and so you wrote a check, or government, fell in love with the provider and appropriated somebody, those days are quickly coming to an end, and I think they should. I think we want to invest into what works, not what we hope works. And so what's happening is those days, the new day is the days of data and evidence-based practices and accountability. And if government doesn't lead it, then philanthropy is going to lead it, and somebody's going to lead it. So the days are changing. Salt Lake County got involved in this Pay for Success transaction and assumed this metric that benefited the state. We know that if kids succeed in preschool, they're less likely to get involved in a gang 10 years later. But we couldn't build, Goldman Sachs and J.B. Pritzker aren't willing to sit around for 10 years on tangential data. We needed something with a closer nexus. So we used preschool as our nexus and proxy for other successes. But you're going to see more of this, of government and philanthropy quantifying what they want to see and then how soon they'll see it. Just one last plug, and we're being told to wrap up, but I think one of the hurdles in Pay for Success is one of the biggest back-end beneficiaries is the federal government. When you look at the savings that could be accrued to Medicaid and are not, and in fact, we've been looking at some Pay for Success where the beneficiary would be BetterHelp for Medicaid recipients. And what we see is if we do that, then we're going to be punished with less Medicaid dollars coming to Salt Lake County. So Senator Orrin Hatch is running legislation. It's bipartisan legislation in both the Senate and the House, but Senator Orrin Hatch is the Senate Republican sponsor to really bring the federal government to the table in Pay for Success transactions. Watch for that, and in this year, we're hopeful that we might get that through this year.
Great, thank you very much. I was hoping to have a little time for questions. Do we have any time for questions? Nope, I'm being told no, but please feel free and come talk to the panel after the breakout sessions, and hopefully we can answer your questions.